Okay, I'm creating this follow-up video to my not mentions, but statements on the D&D Next playtest. Sort of a, well, it is a follow-up. Guys, I just said it was follow-up. Anyway, it's a follow-up addressing the 3 comments I've gotten so far, because some things that were reasonably profound were said, and I feel like I should address them. Because of just the sheer nature of the comments and how my experience with previous editions might be different than the ones in the commenters. There's only 3 comments so far, but since I am in a position to do it and I have a free moment, I want to actually interact with people that are commenting on my videos as much as possible. Might actually encourage more commentation and more videos in my free time. But anyway, let's just proceed. I'm going to click away from this particular screen so I can look at the comments and read them off. Of course, most of you probably know these because you've either read them or you wrote them. Anyway, the comment that is most strongly provoking this response is as follows from, actually, he commented twice. 2 of the 3 comments are from Puddin' Cup. And the first comment being, I agree this is not enough to judge the system on. I disagree with the idea that I should have the ability to fight off a wizard because I live in a world of magic. If someone drops an atomic bomb on my house, I really don't have an alternative means of retaliation because I live in a world of science. Also, I dislike the notion of I hit things with my stick is somehow worse than 4E's I use cleave at will. Again, it's not as if players read the same fluff text every round. I find it limiting. I'll go ahead and include his second comment. I liked 4E, but I'm kind of missed describing what I was going to do. And I found all the bits they added to the 4E fighter a little too gamey with the marking and such. I agree completely. If this packet was the final offer, I would say why bother, which is kind of the point of a video I made 2 weeks ago, and why I haven't bothered to vlog about it. Because this is not really anything new. Whatever. Good video, sir. First of all, thank you for the compliment on the video and for commenting, well, having one really long comment that spilled over into a second post. Let's break down the statements you've made. Well, not necessarily break them down, but break down and sort of categorizing, taking them point by point. As far as 3.5 goes, and the whole disagreeing with the idea that you should have the ability to fight off the wizard because you live in a world of magic. System-wise, this also refers to another comment. So this is going to pretty much address all 3 comments. The other comment, I'll read it off in a minute. It's talking about how balance issues are irrelevant because it's not a PvP game. I'm going to address this right off the bat as well, with this paragraph here about the needing the ability to fight off a wizard. First of all, the part of my counter-argument that will, well, not really disband their statements, but, explain my perspective at least. In 3.5, and I'm not sure about 2nd edition and 1st, because 1, I've never played 1st, and 2, it's been a while since I've played a long-term 2nd edition game. I've only played like 1 session of 2nd edition within the past 12 years, so pardon me for not including 2nd and 1st edition in my statements of how previous systems have operated. But in 3rd edition and 3.5, not in 4th edition, because of how things worked, 3.0 and 3.5 were somewhat a PvP game. Not necessarily player versus player, but class versus class. This doesn't apply to 4th edition, because 4th edition you're not actually supposed to put the classes as they are against each other. 4E does things completely differently as far as classes go. But why do I say it's a class versus class game in a PvP kind of style where fighters will go against wizards? Because that's how you make evil wizards. You actually put class levels on a generic human. Because when you're fighting in 30.5, when you're fighting an evil wizard, you stat a wizard. You make him a 20th level wizard. That's how the system is built. So you're effectively building what is, by all definition, a player as a wizard and putting that player equivalent against the party in 3rd edition and 3.5. If you don't do this, there is no means by which to actually have an evil wizard be the villain and fight the wizard, unless you considerably nerf the thing. But as the rules are written in 3rd edition and 3.5 to make evil wizards or evil fighters or evil rogues or some such, you put class levels directly onto a human. You basically just make, well, not a human, but an elf or some such. You basically make a character. Or you slap on them class levels onto a monster, like a wizard dragon or something. So yes, in 3.5's case, balance between classes is incredibly important. And it becomes incredibly important for all the classes to have some means of stopping each other and not being so completely different. If the party of... It comes to the point where if the party's going up against an evil wizard and there's nobody with at least use magic device, the wizard at the low cost of 5,000 gold pieces, which he's a villain, 5,000 gold pieces is nothing. He could make it where the party cannot possibly win, regardless of whether they roll high on their initiatives or not. So it's just one single spell in a high-level game. You meet the wizard, an entire party, everyone rolls natural 20. The evil wizard rolls a 1, including rules where house rules where 20s automatically go first and 1s automatically go last. The wizard still goes first if you use all the supplements. That's because 3.5 is screwed to all hell as far as balance goes. It doesn't apply in just core rules, because the entire party will just go up to the wizard and kill him before he gets initiative. But once he gets initiative with core rules, he's won. So yeah, in summary, it's sort of a PvP system in 3.5 and 3rd edition's case because that's how you fight evil versions of your classes. This does not actually apply to 4th edition, because all the classes aren't built to go against each other. You can put class levels onto a monster. It says specifically in a book. This is one of the main complaints, well, not main complaints, but a common complaint I hear about 4th edition is you can't put class levels on monsters or NPCs when you actually can. It's just in the DMG and not the monster manual. It's applied somewhat like a template. You add all of the class abilities, and then you add 1 power of each type that it would have. For instance, if it's 2nd level or above, it has a utility power, and an at-will, an encounter, and a daily. And only 1 of each. So it's not like got 2 or 3 at-wills, and multiple encounter powers, and multiple dailies, and multiple utility powers, because that gets incredibly broken. 4E really isn't a PvP game, so I'll agree with you in that regard. It's so bad in the case if you just straight put classes against each other in 4th edition, the other side will probably almost automatically win every time, or be shut out completely. But usually the enemy side will win every time because there's a unified strategy. I remember in a previous game I played against a DM that didn't know you weren't supposed to just put class levels onto a monster, and basically just gave them full power spectrum, and I couldn't do crap playing my warlord because I couldn't strategize turn to turn because the party of 5 fighters we were going up against kept shifting everyone on the battlefield all over the place, repositioning us insanely, marking everyone. It was ridiculous. So yeah, that part where D&D is not a PvP game, it's a... Here's the comment, the second comment that shares commonality with that, about not not having to have the ability to fight off a wizard. But we'll go more into that exact statement later. The other comment was, the main problem I see with talking about balance issues like this is that everyone needs to remember that D&D isn't really a PvP game. It's a party taking on everyone game. so there's no real reason that the fighter needs to have some sort of ability to counter a wizard's ability. It isn't a game of arena combat. Every class has their own unique take on the challenges the party will face, and all of those together allow for the party as a whole to be better. True, but as I just said and spent like nearly 10 minutes talking about, and 3.5 especially, you pretty much run into player equivalents all the time in some campaigns. You're either facing monsters or you're facing a class. So it's effectively PvP sometimes. Heck, sometimes I would basically just run fighters as like tough goblins. So yeah, it's PvP to an extent as far as class versus player versus enemies with class levels. Would happen frequently in some 3.0 games. If you're going to be fighting, human beings or civilized races, they have class levels. And 4E, not so much. Anyway, the main balance issues between the 4E fighter and wizard analog isn't as much of a gap. And it's a little too close, maybe sometimes. It's debatable. My statement about the fighter needing to be able to combat the wizard was more addressing the fact that instead of like a slight curve where the wizard is here and the fighter can, if he's good at his job, he can manage to beat the wizard sometimes, like 40% of the time he can just do it, has some means by which to counter the magic and can't just be automatically shut down. It was mainly addressing while 4th edition can be arguably, curved like this with one side or the other. This usually being like controller classes, being able to lock down like non-controller classes, but, subjectively they might be even. In 3.5, fighter, wizard. I'm not even sure if that's on camera, but even if it's not on camera, you get the picture. Completely different league. In 3.5, you either have magic or you die to somebody with magic. It's not quite that drastic, but even in Pathfinder, which addresses some of the balance issues, you compare a rogue to an inquisitor, which, sure, a rogue in the right contextual situations can do more damage. He's reasonably balanced by comparison, and the Inquisitor doesn't have a large array of magic, but there's still very little reason to play a rogue instead of an Inquisitor. They both have pretty much the same skill set, and the Inquisitor's got magic and can do pretty much the same level of damage once he gets up there in level and gets the appropriate abilities. And he can do it in more situations, and doesn't actually suffer from many of the design flaws that the rogue has in 3rd edition and 3.5, it being Pathfinder being natural. And just so there's no questions about it, a design flaw in 3.5 for the rogue is they can't start with weapon finesse, and that's very restrictive to them sometimes if they don't build a certain way. They pretty much have to put points in strength when they might want to be entirely finessed. It's part of the whole video-long debate I could go into about mechanical differences between 3.5 and 4th edition, and how 3.5 was a little too ability score heavy for some classes, and 4th edition makes ability scores flexible, but in some cases can be somewhat irrelevant. For instance, in 4th edition, Constitution is pretty much completely useless. But that's a debate for a completely different video. Anyway, back to the original comment about disagreeing with the idea that, I should have an ability to fight off a wizard because I live in a world of magic. If someone drops an atomic bomb on my house, I really don't have an alternative means of retaliation because I live in a world of science. It's not the same thing. You don't live in... that's a bit of a stretch. I'm not saying like a random fighter should be able to, to counter, let's say, Force Cage or Meteor Swarm just because he exists in the world. And despite the fact that he's level 5, I'm saying like an elite battle-hardened veteran that has spent like 5 years fighting all the major threats that the world has to offer, like freaking dragons, various sorts of mages. He's experienced all of this crap, like dragons, meteor swarms, freaking fireballs, everything. He has fought everything in the entire freaking universe that you would encounter logically when you're reaching the level in which a wizard has meteor swarm. He should be able to somehow beat, through just sheer determination or being smart or, having some tool necessary to be able to, by some miracle, overcome the difference in power level magic can be. The wizard should beat him a large majority of the time, especially if he's specifically prepared. But the wizard should not have anything to do, anything that is basically, okay, you're my level, you lose. That is just not fair. You're my level, you're 5 levels higher than me. I'm level 15, you're level 35. But you're not a mage, you lose. I beat you automatically, despite the fact that you're more than twice my level. That's how unbalanced magic could be in 3.5. I'm just saying, magic shouldn't be the end-all be-all like it was in 3.5 at higher levels. Instead of random happenstance guy being able to counter a nuke, it's more of a statement of somebody that's used to fighting on a battlefield should be able to he's firing assault rifles at people with assault rifles. He should somehow be able to counter the guy that pulls out a rocket launcher. If he gets hit with the rocket launcher, sure, he's dead, but if he's seizes the rocket launcher, manages to through sheer skill and evasion and movie-style badassery, get out of the way of the rocket launcher fire, sneak up behind the guy and slit his throat, or get within the range of the thing where he can't actually use his weapon and using his wits and tactics and combat skills to overcome something of vastly superior firepower, like the soldier that grabs a freaking claymore mine and sets it up in the path of the tank, and the tank rolls over it and is rendered completely useless. That kind of thing. He should have tools by which, if he applies his skills and he's smart and fights using his tools, he should be able to win sometimes. It gets to extremes in 3.5, and it varies. It's usually okay, but it can get skewed very easily. There needs to be some means of, like I've said many times, and I said it several times in the thing, it doesn't need to be like this. Sure, I agree. The wizard should not be equally as powerful as the fighter, but the gap should be like this, not like this. And yeah, some people could argue, well, the wizard starts off here, where he's the wizard and he's really freaking overpowered and he's wishing he was the fighter. But sure, starts off like this, does not defend ending like this. There needs to be where, he begins like this and then ends like this, at most. That's all I'm saying. And 4th edition, a lot of things about 4th edition where it fixed things that needed to be fixed, but did it too much. And 5th edition seems to fix a lot of that. Something I didn't mention in my overview of the thing, well, I might have mentioned it. I didn't bother to rewatch the video. But one thing I might not have mentioned or might not have gone into greater detail about is the healing system. In case I didn't mention it, you have some sort of a system based on hit die instead of healing surges, where effectively you have a number of healing surges equal to your level, and the healing surge value is effectively your hit die. Let's say you're a dwarven fighter that has a d12 hit die because you're a dwarven fighter. When you would spend a healing surge after battle and you treat your wounds, you would spend one of your hit die. You would roll the d12 and regain that many hit points. It's relatively simple, but there are some confusing things about the wording. The wording needs to be tweaked. For instance, it's easily understandable for somebody that's been playing for a while and has experience with multiple editions and stuff like that, but while everything in the playtest materials basically Everything else, mind you, is basically, I can explain this to somebody that has never touched a pencil and paper RPG and explain it to them in a sentence, and they will completely understand it. While the healing system would need at least a small paragraph at best, because it's kind of convoluted. The rest of not convoluted, but it's kind of clunky compared to the rest of the system, which is very, very concise and, I hate to use crisp, but, crisp. It's very, sharp and to the point. You can explain it in one sentence, like I said, and there will be no questions. It will be completely understood. Bam, one sentence. Oh, I get it. Move on. I understand. No questions needed to be asked. But the healing system, inevitably, questions will be asked, because when I'm reading it, I read it, I'm an experienced veteran, and I ask a question in my mind. Oh, so you spend hit die? And I lose the hit die? Do I lose it out of my maximum hit points? Do I add this hit die to my maximum hit points? It's something that needs to be read over and over, and not over and over, but over and concisely to be understood. It requires more than a sentence. While it works perfectly fine, it's just not as clear, crisp, and concise as the rest of the system, so it comes off as even more clunky than it actually really is. It could stand for some tweaking and rewording. But anyway, yeah, I'm running a little towards the end of the video, but let's regard the last major comment about the thing. Sorry about that loud noise. My computer fan is acting up. Anyway, it says also I dislike the notion of I hit things with my stick is somehow worse than 4E's I use cleave at will again. It's not as if the players read the fluff text every round. I find it limiting. I have to agree somewhat and disagree in somewhat, because if you've got all of these powers that enable you to do lots of stuff, you don't need to improvise as much. It's one of those cases of 4E taking something that needed fixing in 3.5 and going too far with it. While I personally like the power system because I've gotten a grip on it and, a full grasp of the thing, the large majority of players would be like, I use these powers, I'm not going to think out of this box. I have these powers, this is what I can do. It's a flaw in the design of the system, and it's not actually what they intended it to do. You can still do all the improvisation things you could do previously in 3.5, but these powers kind of put you in a box unless you free yourself from it and think outside the box. I've played in plenty of 4th edition games in which I did similar things to what I did in 3.5. In 3.5, you have all this, freedom. You hit things with sticks, and that's your primary method of attack, but you think outside the box, and that becomes new ways of attack, and you can have feats that give you the ability to trip and grapple people instead of powers. But the thing with 3.5, and this is fine, but the combat system could be more fleshed out. That's all I'm saying. But in 3.5, in order to get any variety in combat, you have to improvise, or you have to go through the effort of taking specific feats to enable you to do these extra combat actions. And combat expertise is not a feat that everyone can take. You have to have certain ability scores to do it. Therefore, you have to build you have even more ability score burden upon you if you want to pursue those options. It's another one of those things of 3.5 doing something, and then 4E fixing it too much with the whole ability score weight thing. Hopefully 5E will, peel back the too far a little bit, but not go too far back. Personally, if there's a rules module to plug in to have powers, I will have them, and I will prefer to run them and use them. But that's just because I have a full grasp on not being trapped inside the box that powers unintentionally create. That's all I'm saying. Powers are good, but being stuck with just being able to hit other people's with sticks and not having this power over here that enables you to like slide somebody that over there while hitting them, or cause them to be flat-footed, or do all that sorts of crazy stuff like light him on fire, or like smite him with divine energy, deal radiant damage, give your allies attack boostiness. Just as because you're a fighter or because you're a warlord, you just get these things because you're trained in particular combat techniques. I like that being in powers. I can understand, build it with feats, but that becomes restrictive. It's something I could make an entire other video about, explaining exactly the full breadth of why I prefer it. It's just a matter, like I said, 3.5 combat is fine. It's just personally, I prefer powers as something that's added on, rather than just being stuck with I gain these capabilities through feats that not every character will have, and my primary method of attack is beating things with sticks, and in order to do anything else I need to pursue these feats or improvise. In 4E you can improvise just as much, and you don't need to be burdened by feats. That's all I'm saying. Anyway, by this point in the video, you're still hearing me, but I'm probably not moving because I've gone over 25 minutes. So anyway, you probably won't see the salute I make at the end of my usual videos and saying Cheese of Ages signing off. But anyway, Cheese of Ages signing off.